can do is we all have suppliers. And do we have the kind of companies? Are we looking for the startups in our incubator that are Black owned? Well, the vast majority is not, but they are there if you just start looking for them. Exactly what we've done. And then the same on the supplier side. So you round that all off, and then you come to the point that was, the murder of George Floyd put a specific spotlight on racism here in the United States, but we are in 200 plus countries around the world. And racism inequality shows its face in different ways around the world. And as a global citizen, we're having different programs in different parts around the world. Financial inclusion cuts across, that's a starting point for us, but we'll need to find different approaches in Africa, in Europe, wherever else we're active.
So do you think those are both great answers? And it's really interesting to think about what implications this will have in 10 years. Will we look back and say, I know there were questions that came up after George Floyd's murder a month later, and people said, what happens when the anger dies down? What happens when the spotlight shifts, as it inevitably will? Will businesses continue to focus on this? What you're both describing is almost a rewriting of, or a kind of a rejiggering of how business thinks about what its role is. And I know, Julie, you mentioned the Business Roundtable. Business Roundtable famously came out and said, hey, we're not going to put shareholders first. That is not necessarily the focus of business. We got to think about stakeholders as well, think about society. In 10 years, will we look back and say this changed how businesses operate? We're willing to work more together. We have to think more about the impact business is having on society, or do you think this will maybe not carry over for the next, for that long?
It's a good question, because I remember back in 2016, as you may recall, there was that terrible week in the US where we had 2 Black men murdered, and then we had the ambush in Dallas. And at the time, we were optimistic that that terrible week would lead to something new. I do believe this is different. And there'll be, I'm sure, lots of academic papers written around why, and all the different events that came together. But and I believe it's, from my own perspective, different for 2 reasons. First of all, I do think this has been building, right? And we've had this, and there came this time with all these other issues where I have really seen a difference. I mean, the Business Roundtable was always focused on diversity, but was not making the types of statements and the work together that they're doing now. And it is different. You're seeing action, right? So we're going from commitment to action, and I'm seeing that privately and publicly. But there's also a very other very practical reason, is that this is good business. Right? It is good business, and it's good business on 3 dimensions. Michael can talk about better than I the consumer dimension of needing to be able to have a more, you have a very diverse consumer group, and that's true around the world, right? And they're really important and growing, and they're growing in income, et cetera. And so there's a whole, driving force behind who are your consumers. Secondly, there's the talent question. Soon after, when I was talking about this with one of my clients who's in the oil industry, who said, look, it's really hard to get people to go into the oil industry. I need to be able to tap into a broader group of people. And so they were asking for my help in thinking through how could they tap into more, because it's not been a traditional industry where they had a lot of diversity, ethnic diversity, and it's a talent issue, right? And so that is a reason as well. And then there's the diversity around innovation. I mean, we started really doubling down on diversity back in 2014 when we became the first company in my industry to set up digital. And our business was less than 20% digital, cloud, and security. It's now 70%. And we've been investing and made bold goals and have had an incredible run, right? 9% CAGR. We're the leader in our industry. And we did so because we did not believe that we could pivot our company. Think about that pivot, right? Without more diversity, so you get the innovation and the thinking. So if you think about who your buyers are, the need for talent, and then innovation, right? These are reasons why not only is it the right thing to do, but it's the right business answer. And that's why I have confidence that this is a pivotal moment and we will have a very different world in 10 years.
Super interesting. And I love the talent component. I think you're totally right. Michael, what do you think?
Yeah, I think what is different now is that we have a unique opportunity coming out of this crisis. There's a need to rebuild, and that allows you to put aside some of the legacy and build in a different way. And I think that is generally understood, that if we're going to continue to try to do the same thing that we've done in the past, we're looking at getting back on our feet in terms of growth. It's going to require just a different approach. So the starting point is entirely different. So you're looking at not quite a blank piece of paper, but a somewhat more blank piece of paper. So that's the first thing. I think some of the aspects of what COVID has brought to us lead right into this point. I was intrigued when Julie was just talking about access to new talent pools. Working from home. What does this tell us? From a hiring perspective, I can go to communities where I can find diverse talent today because I'm much more comfortable that these people don't actually have to show up in my office in New York or Singapore or somewhere. So we're having a few post-crisis aspects that make us think about the rebuilding in a different way. Now, the aspect of commercial viability on how you address diversity and inequality questions. We've learned that over the last decade, and this comes to this point about capitalism versus stakeholder capitalism versus just thinking about the shareholder all along. I think stakeholder capitalism here, it plays out in a way that, when we thought 10 years ago that financial inclusion is good business, we took a 10-year view. With purely a shareholder focus, we would have never done that. And we said, well, let's see what happens in 10 years. Well, we build our own market, but at the same time, we pulled people into the financial system. And that is good business. We've learned to do that. And as we look forward into new solutions, new markets, new verticals, address racism, help the SME sector, whatever it is, with that kind of a learning, I think that's going to work. And others have been on a similar trip to the point that Julie made earlier. Partnerships matter in the space, and we find more and more like-minded companies that are willing to take the longer-term view. So right now, I think it is a pivotal moment. There's no going back. Yeah.
Well, you're talking about opening up all kinds of markets for talent and for customers and new learnings that you can get as you move to a more diverse workforce and a more diverse customer base. So this is all, I think, good news, and it's going to really change, I would assume, how companies operate over the next 10 years as we just learn, as these changes happen. We only have a few minutes left. This is the Consumer Electronics Show, CES. I do want to get into this question of what kind of technologies you guys are betting on over the next few years. Is there anything you're especially excited about? Julie, you already mentioned AI, the cloud, other things that you're looking at, VR, 5G, when you are trying to prepare your companies for whatever is coming down the road. What are the ones that you're spending most of your time, or you're saying we have to understand how this works?
Sure. Well, let me just start. So I've talked about cloud and AI, which I think are two critical pivots. The third, though, is 5G. In fact, we just did some research that I wanted to share with you that we haven't yet published, where 8 in 10 executives believe that 5G will have a significant impact on their business, and 57% say it will be revolutionary. And what's interesting is that, of course, 5G has started with the consumer, right? In the first wave, and we've got, around the world, you've got people using it with your smartphones. But we're now in the waves that will really be driven by business. But what 5G will enable, right, is tied, of course, to the consumer and the ability to do more of the 3D printing, for example, 3D printing of devices, for able to provide what you want, when you want it, and where you want it. It'll change supply chains because of that. The ability to move at much greater speed, it will really transform business. And so we're spending a lot of time because, again, 5G was something that pre-COVID we believed would take a lot longer in the business world, in part because things like manufacturing were going to change much slower. They're happening much, much faster. And so as a CEO of a company, if you don't understand what is the impact on 5G on my industry, on the and on my company, right, you're missing something. And I think that 5G is probably not being talked enough about more broadly in terms of the capabilities, because pre-crisis it was thought to be, a much slower, sort of rise.
Julie, when you talk about 5G, is the biggest impact the idea of having always-on devices with you at all times that you never worry about how you're communicating with any part of your supply chain, or is it more than that?
It's because the fact of that with 5G you don't have any delay, right? There's zero latency. If you think about how do you use technology in surgeries, right? How do you use it for autonomous driving? So the ability to use technology to really change how we live, right, when you have zero latency is massive. Right, when you think about these more important, areas and more sensitive areas, and that's where, because of course we've already seen the impact, like in the smartphones, but that's where you have to start opening up possibilities that that we don't have today at scale.
Awesome, Michael. What are you looking at?
Well, 5G. So how do I make this more interesting? So let's say, we're also looking at cloud, because you obviously have to push a lot more intelligence, AI-powered intelligence, to the edge of your network. I mean, where we reach every corner and every crook of the world. And if that's your starting point and you say, okay, what else is 5G bringing? There will always be buyers and sellers. So if I look through my lens, in terms of how commerce will change over the next years, always buyers and sellers. What might change is that the buyers might not be Dan or Julie. The buyers might be a machine. So if you think about Internet of Things, tens of billions of connected devices, what will enable that? It's 5G. So on the top of the use cases that Julie just explained, some of these consumer experiences that might be there, telemedicine, whatever it is, I think the next big click forward is the world of Internet of Things and micropayments, fractional payments flying all over the world. With zero latency, as Julie was saying. I think that's where we're going to go. So it's all these foundational technologies coming together. And there would never be a good conversation around emerging technologies if we wouldn't talk about blockchain. So I just throw that in. Early at the beginning of the conversation, we talked about trust and how there needs to be trust in this brave new digital world. And that is a trust-enabling technology, which I think is going to be really critical, because there will always be buyers and sellers that don't know each other. Who is at either end of the transaction? What is being exchanged? So proof of provenance, identifying identity, those are all things that blockchain will help us do. And if you throw that on top of these other three, I think you kind of got the package.
That's great. Well, Michael and Julie, thank you so much. This was such a great conversation. I am looking forward, and I'd love to get a commitment from you. 2031, we meet again right here, and we review all of these and see how we did. You guys in?
There.
All right.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Michael.